Welcome, everyone. Hope you're all doing well on this Thursday afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sharon McLaughlin. I'm the president of ACMP Ontario. I'm very happy to have all of you with us today to dive into a very interesting topic. Um, I'll just introduce our speaker today, Ourique, and I have been having some conversations, and I'm really interested in hearing his story and hearing his thoughts. He's the principal at Reroute Consulting, and we are so happy to have him with us. Might even ask him later. As you can see on the screen, he's an animal lover and a dog dad. So maybe we can add and two cats. So maybe we can add some that into the story as well. But I'm gonna hand it over to Andrew to kick us off. I'm so looking forward to it, and thank you, Andrew, for being with us today and taking us through this interesting topic.
Amazing. Thank you, Sharon. Yes, it's a dog dad of a 2-year-old husky lab mix, 2 black cats. So the house is an absolute zoo. It's chaos because I don't get enough of that in my day job as a change manager. I'm like, I want to come home to a zoo and madness. So, and thank you all for attending today's webinar. I am so honored that you took the time in the evening to come and listen to me talk about change management. Like, you guys don't get enough of that already. So today's topic is navigating the complexity of change using experimentation. And so it's a topic that I am, super interested about. This idea of complexity and trying to test and learn our way through the complexity of change is something that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm really looking forward to sharing with you kind of my thinking and how I approach, managing change in this way, trying to leverage all of the best practices, the tools, the techniques that are available to us to help solve the big issues that are facing organizations today. Just a heads up, so we will be using Menti during the presentation. So if you've not used Menti before, all you really need to do is scan a QR code, and that will take you directly to the voting page. I'll prompt you when that's ready, so just be sure to get your phones out. Not right now. Not right now. Put them down. Right now, we'll talk through the presentation, but I'll let you know when the QR code is ready to go, so that you can cast your votes. And then at the end, we do have some goodies, some freebies that you guys can take away that you can start maybe using some of the stuff that we talk about during today's presentation. So there will be a QR code at the end of the presentation for you to access all of those. But without further ado, I'm going to dive right into the presentation for today. So as you can see on the screen, we're going to talk through a few things. First, I want to give an overview of some of the more popular change theories that I use today in practice, and how I leverage them in order to kind of push this experimental approach to change. So what I actually mean by that, we'll talk next about. So what does experimental approach to change actually look like? And then once we're done talking about the overall theory, I really want to dive into a live example. So I know all of you should have received a copy of the case study, short case study to pre-read. If you haven't had a chance to read it, don't worry about it. I know we're all busy. I will give an overview before we dive into the exercise, and I'm hoping we can have a lively discussion on that topic once we dive into that. And then lastly, because everyone's talking about AI, I figured I should too. So we will talk about how AI can really help support a lot of what I'm talking about here. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll close with an open Q&A in case there are any questions that you have. I'd say, feel free to submit your questions through the chat, through the Q&A function, and then at the end, we'll go through and answer as many questions as we get the time to. I really want to I want to dedicate at least 10, 15 minutes for questions, so feel free to throw them in the chat or the Q&A throughout. All right, so first thing I want to start with is setting the foundation and just talking a little bit about some of the theories, the change management theories that are methodologies that I have used. and continue to use. Just a show of hands, has anyone ever heard of ProSci before? So put a P in the chat if you've ever heard of ProSci. So just go in the chat. Oh, you guys have? No way. Yes, ProSci has been around for, I think it's over 20 years now. It's research based, or it's based on research. It includes a three-phase approach to how you manage change, which you can see on the screen. You've got to prepare, the manage change element, and then the sustain outcomes with ADKAR in the center. I think for me anyway, ProSci was really the first theory out there to kind of talk about this kind of performance-oriented approach to change. The element of like setting what the success looks like or measuring success throughout, monitoring feedback, and then adjusting your approach accordingly was kind of a net new concept for me. And I've been in change management for about 10 years, just over 10 years now. And I really found that fascinating. The idea of, or at least ProSci believes this idea of when you do change management effectively, you're preparing and equipping and supporting people to be able to adopt and efficiently use the change in their work. And when they do that, that's when you start to see the associated benefits to the project. And when that's sustained over a long period of time, that's when you start to realize the organizational benefits that the project set out to accomplish in the first place. So that idea of tracking and monitoring, I jumped all over. I thought it was a solid approach and something that not a lot of people were talking about when it came to change management. So I resonated with that approach and continue to this day. Now, at the foundation, as I mentioned, is ADKAR. And so in order to realize those organizational benefits, ProSci talks about this idea of, you need to make sure that everyone's following along with you throughout the journey of the change, that progression of individuals through change. So they have this approach, which you're all likely familiar of, ADKAR, which is the sequential non-linear way that ProSci says individuals progress through change. So the building awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So really solid framework. Like I said, I continue to use this framework and the theories and the best practices from it today. The next one I want to talk about is Kotter. So let's put a K in the chat if you've ever heard of Kotter before. This one's not as popular, I find. Oh, great. Amazing. Looks like everyone has. We're all very seasoned change managers and professionals. So obviously, a lot of you may have heard of this already. For those who haven't, Kotter describes an 8-step process for leading change. It was developed by Dr. John Kotter. He's a Harvard Business School professor. This model in particular focuses more on mobilizing people, like the masses, to drive and sustain change forward. I personally find this method and the best practices from it very helpful when I'm working on a long-term change, talking like 18 plus months change, where you really need opportunities to drive quick wins forward, build that momentum over a long period of time, and just get the masses to help push the change forward, developing a solid vision for the change, and really using leadership and culture as a driving force to drive to lead change effectively. So that's a little bit about Kotter. Again, a very popular framework, which I leverage today as well. Now, the last one is lean change. Let's put an L in the chat if anyone has heard of lean change before. Maybe not as many. Okay. So lean change is relatively new. It's a more adaptive approach of change management inspired by agile and lean startup principles. I don't believe. Jason Little was the one who created the framework. I believe he was at the conference in Toronto a couple of weeks ago. He did a keynote there. So if any of you attended that, you may have heard his keynote. I unfortunately wasn't able to attend, so I didn't, but I have taken Jason's course on lean change. And this approach is what you would expect when it comes to like agile and agile ways of working. So if you're familiar with agile, the manifesto, lean change has a very similar manifesto themselves. And it really emphasizes this idea of co-creation and continuous learning rather than adhere to any one plan or any one framework. And I find it's really valuable. Well, one, when you're working with agile projects, it fits in very nicely. While ProSci has like an agile method to it or approach, I find the lean change is just honestly the best way to approach agile projects. It fits in really nicely. Um, so it's really good for like fast moving environments, agile projects, as I mentioned, but also because there's a lot of emphasis on trying to engage people in the process early and often. If you're dealing with a change where there's a lot of potential resistance, I also find that lean change can really be helpful to bring people together and get that buy-in that you're looking for, especially early on in the process. So lean change is relatively new. I started integrating this into my approach about a year ago. So it's still relatively new for me, but it's been great. So at this point in the presentation, I would expect you all to kind of be in this place of like, why are there so many frameworks out there? How do we decide which one to use? I'm a little bit confused. Are these the only frameworks out there? The answer is no. There are a ton of frameworks out there. There are, just to name, one other that comes to mind is McKinsey 7S framework that has also been leveraged as part of change. I'm sure there are a ton of others. There are probably some I don't even know about that are frameworks. If you do have other frameworks in mind, pop them in the chat just for us to, go look them up later. And maybe in the next version of this presentation, I'll be able to add those to the list as well. But there are a lot of frameworks. It is very confusing. How do we decide which one to use, which one is going to work best in the situation that we're dealing with? And so to answer that question, I think what we need to do first is just understand a little something about change. And I know that this is likely going to be, something you already know, but we'll just step back a little bit and answer before answering that question. So when we talk about change in organizations, I tend and naturally humans want to find a linear, predictable, and clean way to address a problem. We want steps to follow. We want to be able to use a framework, follow those steps exactly to help reduce some of the complexity and the ambiguity. But in reality, as we all know, change doesn't really fit into a nice, clean model. Change looks a lot more like what you're going to see in this video, a murmuration of starlings, which is a word I didn't realize existed, but apparently that is a flock of starlings, just a fancy way to say it. So I'm gonna play the video. There's no sound, but I just want you to look at, and these are birds actually, believe it or not, all kind of moving in these random, what seems to be random patterns and is. But those are all birds. So it's breathtaking, yes, but it's highly chaotic. And that seems to be a little bit more aligned to what we see day to day in the work that we do. So like the starlings here, or like the work that we do, you can't predict where these starlings are going to go next. So no single bird seems to be in charge here. They seem to be moving together, though, surprisingly, responding to shifts in wind, predators, and the birds around them. And that's kind of like what when I think about people in an organization, that's kind of what I think about. You can kind of try and anticipate how a challenge is going to evolve over time, but often it seems like more of a waste of time to try and anticipate it. Instead, the forces that play in the organization are a lot like what's at play with these flock of birds that you see on the screen. You're dealing with forces that you can't control, like culture, politics, emotions, relationships with leaders, and even external events, all of which evolve over time and are not static. And so just like the starlings, the path forward when we're managing change is emergent. It's not fixed. And the moment we think that we've, figured out that pattern, it changes up on us again and we got to start all over. And so clinging to any one framework in particular, at least in my opinion, almost feels like a liability in a sense, because it's limiting our ability to respond to the complexity and the fluidity of the real world problems that we face. So instead, I think we need to find another way or a more adaptive approach to pulling from all of these methodologies, these frameworks, these tools, so that we can evolve with the situation as it presents itself. And I'm not saying that we abandon structure at all. I think structure is incredibly important. It gets us started. It helps, make sure we're going down the right path. But I think there needs to be an element of responsiveness, and we need to be intentional about what we're doing and when we need to go back to the drawing board to try and figure out what we want to do next. So basically, to sum up, instead of choosing just one model and hoping that it fits from beginning to end, I think our role is more like trying to guide that flock of birds. We won't be able to control where they're going to go next, but we may be able to influence it if we're flexible enough, we're observant enough, and we're prepared to pivot on the fly, and we don't rest in our laurels and stay true to a framework just for the sake of wanting to check the box. So I think the question then becomes, how do you do that? How do you influence the movement of people? How do you remain flexible? How do you stay observant to, these changes and get ready to pivot? And this is where this element of experimentation comes in. First, to get used to this idea of experimenting or testing things out, you got to first you have to come to the realization that there is no silver bullet. And unfortunately, there's no work or guarantees in the work that we do, unless, of course, any of you can have a crystal ball or are mind readers, in which case that does not apply to you. And I want to talk to you later. But for everybody else, it doesn't really work that way. We don't have any guarantees. So the only thing that we can do is try something out, see if it works, and if it doesn't, go back to the drawing board and try something else again. And eventually we'll get to the point where our change lands or aligns with what people need and expect. But how do we actually do this in practice? Because I mean, this sounds all good. And I think one of the gaps that I found with as I was learning about all of these different things was, this is all great, totally makes sense. I completely agree with you, but how do we actually do it? Like, what does it actually look like when I have a problem facing me? And so for me, or for Reroute consulting with clients, I provided this kind of high level structure around like, how do I progress through, create an element of structure with also, or marrying structure with the ability to adapt. And this is what I've come up with. And it's, I think, integrating the best of what we have in all of at least of the three frameworks that I've mentioned. And also incorporates that test and learn mindset that you get from from lean. So you've got the structure that you get from ProSci with the adaptability of lean change. And you're able to leverage all of the different frameworks all at once. So there's a prepare phase, where you're meeting with people, getting answers to your questions, surveying to understand the details of the organization and the change. You're putting an initial plan together around what you want to do and when, and you test it out. Then there's an evaluation phase, and that's a lot to do with ProSci, building those key performance indicators in at the plan phase and evaluate to say like, hey, did this actually land the way that we thought it was? If it does, great, you sustain it. If it doesn't, you go back to the drawing board and try again. And unfortunately, I'm not going to have a lot of time to go through everything on this framework, but I do want to focus on this one phase, this refine phase, because I think it's really important and it really helps to understand the entire approach here, and one that you can start using tomorrow. Well, it's Friday tomorrow. Don't do it tomorrow. Maybe next week. So let's dive into the case study so that we actually get a chance to see this in action. Like, how do we, if we got to a place where we faced a problem, we figured, listen, we thought it was going to work, it didn't work, and what do we do next? And so I want to introduce the case study. And like I said, if you've read the case study already, great, you're ahead of the game. I'm just going to introduce it a bit for those who may not have had a chance to review it yet, and then we'll dive into the activity. So this is actually coming from a real life client, a real problem. All of the issues that we've captured in this case were real issues. All of the ideas that were generated that you'll see as we walk through this case are real life ideas that were generated and things that we actually did in order to try and rectify the issue that we were facing. So let's set the scene. So this was a project in 2022, 2023. So a major engineering and environmental consultancy firm acquired an environmental division of a large international group. This acquisition expanded their reach across Canada, the US, and the UK, and in a few other geographies around the world, adding over 6,000 professionals and consolidating their position as a global leader in environmental services. Several months into the integration, while there was momentum that was being built, we started to get the systems to align within the two organizations. We started to build and communicate details around what's changing and when, and we had good, we were able to build good reputation with leadership and have recurring touch points with leaders that were starting to really we're really starting to set in motion. And we're starting to build some like regular cadence with leaders and employees. At this point, we went out with a survey and we gathered some feedback on how things were going. And we came up with or we heard the following themes, or the following themes came out of the survey. So first off, some employees were expressing some exhaustion from the amount of change that was hitting them. Sure, you guys have never experienced that before in the work that you do. So that came up loud and clear. The other element, this company is, while I said that they are environmental and engineering consultancy, their second job was probably acquisitions. So they've done a lot of acquisitions in the past. And some past acquisition efforts were considered to be a failure. And so a lot of rumors are starting to build or skepticism around our abilities to drive this integration forward successfully started to surface. And people were thinking, this is just going to be like it was last time. And then lastly, the last theme that I'll touch on today was, people leaders were reporting that they were feeling overwhelmed by day-to-day responsibilities. They often obviously will have their own day-to-day work that they've got to do. They've got the people leader responsibility. Now, on top of that, they had to manage this integration. And they themselves were also going through the change. And so leaders were kind of just being overwhelmed overall. So if you put yourself in this situation, put yourself in my situation where I've uncovered these themes, the real question right now is, okay, I've got this information. What am I going to do about it? What am I going to do next? So I want to introduce an adapted version of what Lean Chain calls the hot seat. So this is a template that Lean Change advocates to use, and I've adapted it just a little bit based on what works well for me. And so this can be done virtually through a mural board, whiteboard in Microsoft, or it could be done live. This activity was done virtually in my case. But the way that it works is you first start by identifying what your challenges are. So you have a group of your stakeholders together and you're starting to have conversations around, okay, what are our challenges? And you put them all down on a sticky note. I have done the work for us here. I've gotten us started. I put down the 3 issues that we're facing in this case. Now I'm going to have you guys go into Menti, and I want you, so you can scan the QR code in Menti there. I will also add in a link to the Menti in the chat so that you can go there right away if you want to just stay on your computer. So go in and I want you to vote on what you think is, out of these 3, what do you think is the top change challenge, or what do you think is the biggest concern as change managers that we need to focus in on and help course correct? So I'll give you guys a few minutes to go in and vote, and you should see the results on the screen now. So you've got 3 options: strong memory of past integration failures, increased levels of change fatigue, and then people leaders have limited capacity to support integration activities. Oh boy, it's going to be a race to the end. All right. Oh, We got a pity vote. That's great. Awesome. All right. I'm gonna give it a couple more seconds. If you guys are having any issues, just throw that in the chat, um, so that we know. But I think we have our winner. I think we have our winner. So we're gonna go with people leaders have limited capacity to support integration activities. That's a good one. I was kind of hoping you guys would pick that one. Just so you know, we did have options for all of them just in case, but we're gonna go with the crowd and we'll focus on this one for now. So the way that this activity would work then is just like that. Now you'd be on Mural, so you'd probably do some type of voting dots or something on the Mural board to figure out which is the most popular. And the next step would be to ask the individual who put the sticky note down to get a little bit more information from them around what's like, let's double click onto this. Like, let's brainstorm a little bit about what people leaders, what makes you think that people leaders are actually have limited capacity. Now, because we don't have that individual here, I decided to fill that in for you. And so we'll go through them in detail here. So at this point, you're asking the person who put that sticky note down, give me some more context so that we can come up with a few ideas on how we can solve it. So this is what came up. People leaders are being pulled in multiple directions. Integration work is seen as just extra on top of their existing workload, which I kind of alluded to earlier, jumped the gun a bit. They lack clarity on what exactly is expected of them in the integration, so leading them to disengage just in the overall process. It feels like the change is like happening to them then without being a partner and helping figure out like what do their employees need so that we can help deliver that. A recent survey indicated that leaders feel unsupported or unprepared, and there is a skill gap for leading through ambiguity and managing change within the leadership structure. So a lot of great insights that we gathered, from this activity to just dive a little bit deeper, dig a little bit deeper on the challenges that we face. Now I'm going to put a timer on the clock, which you should see appear on the board. I'm going to give you all, let's say, like 2 minutes. If we need more time, you just let me know. But well, I'm not going to start it now. I'm going to tell you what to do first. So think about this. Take a look at all this stuff and come up with a few ideas or options that you guys would come up with if this was a problem that you were facing and this is the context that you were giving. What are some ideas that come to mind to help rectify this issue? Like, what would you do? What would you do next? So I'll put the timer on and I'll sip my coffee.
Do you want the answers in the chat, Andrew?
Oh, sorry. Yes, in chat. Sorry. Yes. Thank you. Or you can scream them out, whatever works better for you.
If you don't want to type, just raise your hand.
I think we've got somebody. Abba, go ahead. Did I pronounce your name right? Sorry if I didn't.
Correct. Yes.
Is it?
That's my name correct. Abha. Hi everybody. So the survey that we conducted, I will catch from there what are the problems there where we can start with. That would be the starting point, and might be we connect with learning and development to create a learning plan or sessions to help navigate this process. I can also use our change agents or change network to help them. So might be there's several ways to help it, depending upon the situation. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, you talked about a lot of good things there, like establishing the change or using the change agent network or establishing it if it didn't exist, which may be on the board. Spoiler alert already. So that was great. and then trying based on the survey to gather some more insights and information on how to move forward, leveraging a learning plan to do that. Wow, I did not know that was going to happen. I'm very sorry if that was loud in your ears. So great. Thank you, Eva, for that. We got a few other ideas in the chat. So Jamie, provide tools for the leaders. We regularly use talking points to have targeted conversations with their teams. Great idea. Prepare ready-to-use products for them, or ready-to-use products. Thank you. I was gonna be like, what is that? That sounds great. Great idea. That was from Rav. Melissa, create a tool for leaders that helps them with talking points and best practices. I feel like there's a theme that is being created here. Sanibel, create or develop a change champion network. Rosanna, I would suggest putting some tools together for the managers to enable them. Absolutely. And I'd be curious about situation. This is Heather. I'd be curious about situations where leaders have felt supported and prepared in the past and what was different. I love that. This idea of like, what's worked in the past and what can we build on as, ways to improve. And then this idea of finding bright spots, generating like quick wins and momentum through sharing some ideas around like what's actually gone well. I feel like we forget that so many times, or at least I do. Like I'm always focused on like what's going wrong. I'm hardly ever thinking about like, hey, let's share some of the positives that have happened. I'm always trying to just fix the negatives. This is great. Thank you all for the feedback and the engagement here. Ingrid, review and prioritize the integration activities, identify how to implement quick wins. Amazing. Wow. We must have been like synced up in that as I mentioned it. Acknowledge the struggles. I love that idea. That's honestly, sometimes you just need to share that, that realization that, hey, we understand things are rough. It's going to get better. What do you need from me to help support you? And Sharon, sponsorship, supporting priorities, and creating space for leaders to support. Amazing. So that's great. I had these prepared just in case. You never know. It's an evening. It's Thursday. It's Friday Eve. You never know what's going to happen. But there's a lot of great suggestions that are in here. I do think that some of this is similar to what y'all shared, but I do still think that there was a lot of great ideas that were listed here that I think could be added to this board very easily. So the first one is that we've got here is create a leader playbook for each change, and that came up a lot around a toolkit, talking points, FAQs. What are the actions required, like a checklist for leaders? And what you'll notice that I've done here, because I do want to kind of bring this idea of like using multiple frameworks together. So this template itself is from Lean Change, which we use. But what we fill this template with, how do we gather more information to drive these insights forward? Maybe we put together like an ADKAR survey, and reach out to say like, where's the gaps? Is it in awareness? Is it knowledge? You leveraging ProSci in order to drive additional insights. And that's what Abba was kind of talking about. Like, how do you get more information and dig a little bit deeper on the information that you get here? And that would be your immediate next step, maybe. Now, but what you also see on the sticky notes is a lot of these sticky notes come from best practices that are not just in one framework or shared in one framework, but in all of them. So this idea of creating a leadership playbook is really a ProSci thing, this idea of like, how do you bridge the knowledge and ability gap for leaders? And so that might be an idea. Another idea that's not listed here is, because we did talk about this skill gap around leading change, maybe we need to do some type of training for leaders on how to manage the ambiguity of change with their teams, drive that skill up a bit. So that could be on the board. And again, that would be a ProSci related thing, but it also could be, a Cotter thing, this idea of, building momentum and driving people or mobilizing leaders to help support the change and drive that change forward. Creating a channel for managers to share tips and ask questions. Similarly, activate the leaders so that they can push the change forward. So it's not just resting on the change manager or the small team that we usually have. And then to relay some of the points that were shared in the chat and Abba as well live is the change agent network, maybe establishing that. At this point, we didn't have one. So creating one would have been a great idea, very ProSci, related. And then lastly, developing, oh, I think there are two others. Yes, two others. So develop a presentation each month with a updated roadmap around what's happening, in the future, so that you give people that future focus, or that future lens, not just like what's happening in the next like couple of weeks or couple of days. It's like, okay, that's great, but what does this mean overall for me? How can I anticipate what's going to happen next to help limit some of that anxiety? Which is mainly it's kind of like it's a very shared one, but I would say it's more Cotter, this idea of like removing barriers and obstacles, and avoiding roadblocks. And I think a big roadblock would be resistance of not knowing what's happening in the anxiety. So I feel like that is a key Cotter recommendation. And then lean change, because we can't leave them out. This idea of like doing something short, quick, easy, just to get some points on the board. And this idea of like micro learnings, to do like some short 5-minute like video clips to recap like what's happened before and what's going to happen in the future. But a lot of great ideas. Now, so you got this whole list of sticky notes. The next step is for you to pick one to do. It's like there's a lot of great ideas. You may have capacity to only do one. You may have capacity to do 3. So at this stage, we do another voting. So usually just dots, and people get like, 2, 3, or however many dots each. And they put a dot on the sticky note that they like the best. And then you basically will rank them in terms of, we should try this one first. If that one doesn't work, we go to the next one, and so on and so forth. And again, if you could do more than one, you do it. And then you test it out, see if it works. If it doesn't work, you come back to the board and you try something else. So this is a really quick way to bring everyone together. And it accomplishes 2 main things. One, you get this huge list of stuff you can do to solve the issue that you have. And 2, you brought people in, your stakeholders in, to help co-create this. And so when you start to do these things, they're going to be your advocates, because they had a hand in selecting what it is that you do. Even if their sticky note isn't picked, they were part of the conversation, and they know why what you decided to do was selected in the first place. It's a great activity. It's super quick. It doesn't have to be long. It can be as short as 30 minutes. We just kind of showed that it could be done in like 15. So it's a great idea. Now, of course, I'm not going to let you guys try and figure this out all on your own. So I did create a template that you can download and you'll get access to at the end of the presentation. It is an adapted version of the hot seat. It's a little bit simplified than the hot seat version, which I think works really well for that, just a much quicker kind of assessment. And we call it the next move. Like, what's your next move? We think it's catchy. So give it a try. You'll have a copy of the template with instructions on the left, and you can give this a try as soon as next week if you want to, or just don't do it on Friday. Like I said, nobody likes doing work on Fridays. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk through is AI, because if this concept is new to you, this idea of like leveraging multiple frameworks to accomplish and try to experiment on, what you should do next, it can be very daunting, to be honest. Like, I think it's the right approach to use, but at times I still feel like it's a lot to try and be an expert in all of these different frameworks. And so what I leverage a lot is AI to help figure out, help diagnose the problem, and help me come up with a few ideas to get me started. And so this idea of like leveraging AI as your thought partner to help support you, it almost makes it less about you knowing what the answers are to a lot of these questions. And it's more about trying to make sure that you're asking the right questions and coming up with the right prompts. And that, I think, is what the most important thing in today's environment is. Not having all the answers, but being able to ask the right questions. The way I use AI is, and you see it on the screen here, is mainly for three things when it comes to this process. One is to help me clarify the problem that we're facing and define the issue that we're having. So pulling out those key themes and trying to kind of dissect, where are the gaps and what should we be focusing on? So I've put a few prompts in this on the slide here to give you an idea. So based on the stakeholder feedback, what are the themes or patterns that you see coming out of it? AI can really help in dissecting and summarizing feedback that's been shared across hundreds of folks. Instead of going through line by line, AI I find does a really great job of summarizing the key themes to help extract that for you so that you come out with like those sticky notes on the front to get people started. The next one is exploring. So if you're not an expert in all of the different frameworks, like I'm not, but you have a working knowledge in them, AI can really help you dig a little bit deeper and get to the root and make sure you're not missing anything. So some of the prompts that we have here is like, how would how would you handle this situation if you're following a lean change approach or if you're leveraging ProSci? And it can generate a few ideas based on those methodologies or those frameworks, or you can just ask them to include, you know, what do you think just in general, and just drive some results from that. And I think one of the most important things, which we haven't talked about too much, is that because we're doing experiments, you also need to think about how are you tracking to make sure that what you're doing is achieving the results that you want it to achieve. And so a lot of the times, especially, I mean, I'm speaking for myself, coming up with metrics is not really my forte, so it's, coming up with those and is not really my thing. I'm more on the people side of things. And so AI can really help you with trying to come up with a few ideas on what are some metrics that we want to track. If we think about, some of the options and ideas that we came up with, so let's say the toolkit idea for managers as they're going through changes. Maybe one of the ideas that we use, one of the metrics that we use is how often are people downloading this toolkit? How often are they clicking on the links in there? What seems to be the most visited page in the toolkit? And that might be a really good way to assess, like, are people actually aware that this thing exists? And is this meeting the needs? If it is, great. If it's not, maybe we move on to something else. So thinking about the metrics is a really important step to then determine whether, if we think back at like the test, evaluate, refine loop at the evaluate stage, like did what we thought was going to work? If not, let's go back and try something else. And I think the important concept to remember is that I think a lot of the times we think about, change as it's like you don't really get, no one's really coming to us and being like, oh, that was great, like thank you so much. But you do hear it when people don't like what you do, right? So that tends to come in spades. But I think just to remember that you're never going to be able to like, you know, do what everyone needs with just one thing. And so maybe you try one idea on the outputs page, on the output column, and that maybe gets like 10 people on board. They're like, yeah, that toolkit, that was for me. You try something else like those 5-minute, micro videos. Maybe that gets 100 more people on board, but slowly but surely, you're going to get more and more people to actually align with the strategy that you put in place. And so the idea is just to try things out. And then the learnings you get from that will help inform what you try, next time. Maybe something that was at the bottom of your priority list turns out to be the thing that like got the most amount of people engaged, and you put that up to the top the next time. And so it's always iterative, right? And you basically are never married to any one suggestion. And I do think AI can really help with that. It alleviates the pressure on feeling like you need to be an expert on everything. I think you'll get a copy of the presentation as well. So if you didn't get a chance to screenshot these prompts, they're by no means, the best prompts, but there's some that I've used to help get me started. All right, so that's the end of the presentation. Did I say I wanted to save 15 minutes for questions and we literally nailed it? That's great. That is a win for me. So if you have any questions, for me, just based on, the materials that I've shared thus far, I'm happy to answer them.
Andrew, there is one question in the chat from
Okay.
Sanibel. Which AI tools would you use for these examples?
Yeah, so it really, so for me, I use ChatGPT. You could also use Copilot if your company is sets that up. I think both are really good. I believe ProSci has their own AI agent. I can't remember the name of it. Somebody might in the group. But if you're interested in that, I feel like that could really help to dive into some ideas from ProSci. Because the gap that you have with like Kaya, that's right. That is what it is. That's I think where you'll get a lot of the detailed information from a Copilot or ChatGPT. It'll be very surface level because a lot of what ProSci has is proprietary. So I think only Kaya can like dig into the details of that methodology. If you have any other ideas on like AI, let me know. I'm a big AI nerd. So if there's something else out there, I would love to know.
I think that's the thing. There's something new every day.
I know there's so many, honestly. I do feel like I'm hearing about a new one every day.
Any more
Any?
questions for Andrew?
Oh, thanks, Shelley.
I have a
Well, as
question. Sorry,
yes.
I don't know how to raise my hand in Zoom. Apologize.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I do appreciate the approach of kind of taking what you need, right? And remaining agile. I do have a question on, I'm trying to figure out how to formulate it here. Just in general, in order to kind of pause to reassess and almost have what I would call like a retrospective, right? Reflect back on what you've done thus far. I just find that it takes a lot of energy, a lot of time, just more of our resources. And I feel like we're stretched thinner than ever on a lot of the projects that I'm working on. So how do you navigate that when you're trying to stay true to, taking a beat, making sure what you're doing is working and making sure that we can pivot? I find that I have great intentions at the start of a project. And then, this and that, the waves are coming. There's, this change and that change. And then I usually kind of put things like that on the back burner, but also do recognize the importance of it. So, any light you can shed on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, honestly. And I'd be lying to you if it's like, oh, I get to, I bring everyone into a meeting. We got this mural board going. Everyone's throwing sticky notes up. It's great. We're voting with dots, and everyone's having a great time. Unfortunately, that doesn't usually work out that way. What in cases where it does, it's highly effective. Like if this is part of like a an in-person workshop or it's an activity, it's really great to do live. What I typically will do is I'll use a subset of people, usually people I've built a really strong relationship. And maybe I won't go into mural and do this, but like the conversation that I have is getting at the same thing, like, and so, this is an idea that would be very interactive, but, feel free to like take just the concepts of it and just apply it to a conversation that you have or your change agent network. If you have them and in a meeting, maybe you share with them, get them engaged in trying to diagnose the problem. And I think the change agent network is where you could probably have a little bit more flexibility to do something like this. I mean, if it's like me, I always find it's like really hard to engage that group with anything. So like this would be a really good way to like get them involved. So it's not just like a one-way presentation all the time with them. And so that might be a way to do it. But a lot of the times this is like an informal conversation that I'm having with a few like partners that I have or some representatives from the business to help kind of figure this stuff out. And you may not have to do it all at once. You can maybe, like set up one-on-one chats with some people and collect all of those like stickies one-on-one instead of trying to do it as a group.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Before people leave, I will, as you guys are thinking about your other questions, I will throw this up on the screen. So a copy of the Miro template, if you want to try it out, take a look at it, play around with it. Again, you don't have to use it as a Miro board. You can really figure out a way that works best for you in the project. Some, you'll be able to do this, like from an agile project perspective, you may have a little bit more flexibility to do something like this. They love their boards, so this will fit right in. But there are a ton of other ways that you can leverage that. And there is also a summary of today's presentation in a handout as well. So if you scan that QR code, it'll take you to a survey just to get a sense of where I can improve. It's always about a retrospectives even for this. And then once you complete the survey, it'll take you to the handout so that you get a copy of all of this stuff, including the Miro template. Thank you, Sanibel. Appreciate that. Thanks, Melissa. Oh, Irene, thank you.
So as everyone is scanning and maybe we can just see if there's any further questions that people have thought of, and I have some comments that I'd like to feed back to you, Andrew, about what some of the learning is today. So anybody else want to raise their hand or come off mic with any questions? This was a great conversation, and I think, you know, I wrote down a whole bunch of notes, and first, I love the concept that you outlined, the different methodologies of change, and, you know, to bring it back to ACMP, you know, we have our standard for change management, and all these different methodologies are all wrapped up when that standard is created. They're all wrapped up into that. So all these different methodologies have slightly different connotations. And I think I wrote down that change is moving faster than ever. So to be successful, and I think that's what Jamie was saying, you know, you're in a project that's going left and right and backwards and a couple steps back before we go forward. And I think the concept is wonderful. You're going to try this. It might not work. Well, you can try something different the next time. And, you know, if you're fortunate to be working with that client, you know what's going to work for the next time. So I think that's a great message. And I also love the message that you can use AI just to get you started. Putting that right question in there. I love the prompts, Andrew. Thank you for that.
Of course.
And I also think your message around, you're not going to please everyone. So if you catch someone with one way, you might catch 5 people this way, and try something else and catch the next group of people. So I think that was really powerful as well. So thank you for that.
Of course, yeah, thank you.
There's so much great comments. This was a wonderful presentation and a wonderful way to spend a Thursday afternoon. So thank you. I love how you are giving us an opportunity to take this away and thinking about it more with your tools and the presentation. And I just want to thank you. I want to thank everybody for joining today. We at ACMP Ontario do these events for you, and love to get individuals like Andrew to spend some time and have a conversation. We are always looking for content ideas that our members want to talk about. And so thank you everyone for coming. We too appreciate the feedback. And I think this will be our last session for a couple of months, but we'll get back onto it in the fall and have some more content. So thank you, Andrew.
Thank you so much. And last thing I'll say is, you know, in the handout, there is my contact information. If you have any questions after the fact, sometimes you need some time to think about it. Feel free to email me. You've got that in there. I'm happy to connect, you know, after the fact if you have any other questions. But it was an honor to be here today, and thank you all. Thank you ACMP Ontario and yourself, Sharon, for co-hosting here with me and giving me the opportunity, and for all of you for taking the time on your Thursday evening to share it with us. It means a lot. Figure, you know, this is a great thing to get you just until the game later on tonight, you know. Go Edmonton.
Go Edmonton.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.